This caused him great concern because he had nowhere to store all these new fruits that had grown and all these grains that were going to be harvested. And then, eureka, he got a great idea. I'll pull down my barn, because it's too small, and I'll build a much bigger barn, or maybe even 3 or 4 bigger barns in its place, so I can harvest all these fruits, all these grains, and store them. And I can keep them there for whenever. Now remember, he was an incredibly rich man. And the extra was not necessary for him, except he will now, he believes, be richer than he ever even imagined. He will have enough wealth if he can store all these grains in his barns and all these wonderful fruits. He'll have enough wealth to live numerous lives. And he's cried out, he said, "Oh my soul, I have such riches, I can eat and drink and be merry." But the voice of God said, "You foolish man, this night your soul is required of thee. You are going to die." They didn't get to build barns, which is a pity. So you've laid up all your treasure for yourself. You've thought about this. Lay all up this treasure for myself and in my barns, and yet not for God. God being a metaphor for society, for others maybe. Now, to be honest, it's a bit of a hard lesson. I mean, we all prepare for our future. We all lay up a certain level of wealth or comfort. It may not be fruit and grain, but it may be a pension fund. It could be a bit of property. So that we, like him, can live and be merry at some stage in our lives and not have to worry about bringing in any more income. Well, I suppose the lesson we're to learn from it, because in all these stories in the Bible, there is a lesson. And the lesson we're to learn from it is that we have to rise above just being an individual and think in terms of the collective, of community, of those around you. I think that's the hard lesson. But you know that in our world today, there are entire cultures where one of those philosophies is accepted more than the other. And by that I mean the sense of individualism versus community or collectivism. If you take the United States of America, which we tend a little bit towards, the individual is at the center of American culture. People talk of the American dream, which is becoming wealthy. Yet, of course, there is a level of collectivism in America, but there's a great sense of the individual. And we're drawn to America because of the American dream. So we can store up fruits and grains for the future and have maybe an apartment in Florida with a swimming pool, so that when we retire, just go down to Florida, hang out there on the back of the fruits and the grains. And yet in other countries it's the reverse. South Korea, for instance, tends towards the principles of collectivism. South Koreans are far more motivated to work for the community, to submit to the collective rather than the individual. Some might think they do it in the extreme, and there isn't the same level of intellectual individual thought that you might get in America. Innovation, I don't know, I'm just suggesting that. It's a bit like the kibbutzim in Israel, which is the collective above the individual, living with a community. And in the Bible's not clear on it. It goes, maybe not. And there are stories and parables relating to both philosophies. In John 11:50, Caiaphas says, "It is better that one man dies for the nation than the whole people perish." So that is giving up everything, your life, for the nation, surrendering the individual for the nation. And indeed, in the early days of early Christianity in Jerusalem, they pooled all their resources and they gave what they didn't need to those in need. And in various biblical texts, there are stories of those individuals giving to others, parting with everything for the collective. But all the time in the stories of the Bible, what is clear is it's not compulsory. It's done out of personal commitment, not because you're ordered to do it. It's not the Soviet Union, where things were just taken from you and divided up, whether you like it or not. It's a level of your own commitment to support the community. And that comes across in a lot of the biblical stories where it's dealing with the individual versus the collective. The individual versus the common good. Sometimes you will hear voices making arguments about the common good. Usually making arguments about the common good as they oppose certain individual rights. Now that's the thing that does worry me when the common good is stated so in order to oppress other people. We saw that here in particular during the campaign for equal marriage, where I was on with various clergy on various radio programs, and I was always quoted to me was, well, you've got to think of the common good. If we have equal marriage, it'll upset society and it'll destroy the common good. So it made me think a lot about that you have to find a balance between the individual's rights, the collective rights, and also not be blackmailed by terminology such as the common good. Now, of course, extreme individualism puts the individual ahead of the group, regardless of the effects on the group. That it's all about the individual's opportunity to massively enhance his or her wealth or whatever else. We think back to feudal days, although we don't have to think back to feudal days, because with our neoliberal economics, to some extent, that's happening again in our world today. Like the man in our story, gathering in astronomical wealth and not even knowing at the end of the day what you're worth. That you could live 20 lifetimes and still not even make an imprint on the level of wealth you possess. Jeff Bezos. Now, I'm not picking on him, just mention him. I don't want him to get upset because I mentioned him in my pulpit. I don't think he will. Jeff Bezos is worth $199.2 billion US dollars. Now, I know in that wealth it encompasses business and lots of other things, and probably provides thousands upon thousands of jobs. Elon Musk is worth $183.9 billion US dollars. A very interesting man. He makes a lot of comment now on TikTok and that. Some of it interesting, some of it not interesting. Bernard Arnold is worth $218 billion. I wonder, does it worry Elon that Bernard is worth more than him? Does that upset people that, oh God, look, he's got $2 billion more than me. I feel poor. I feel miserable. Yeah, I wonder, probably does happen. Or imagine if you were only worth 50 million and you met them. You'd feel like a Paul. You wouldn't want to be in the same room with them. I've only got 50 million, says Paul McCartney. Actually, Paul's worth a lot. I've just diminished Paul McCartney in your eyes. He's worth a lot more than 50 million, not 218 billion. Now, Bernard, to be fair, Bernard Arnold does, to my knowledge, he puts a lot of money into filmmaking. So into the arts. But all of them have wealth way beyond their imagination. Even when they're sleeping, they're making billions more. It's kind of scary. I think I'd be scared to be that wealthy. Not going to have the opportunity to try it. And it made me think, because when I was in Galway, about the whole issue around collective bargaining. Now, you may think, what has the Bible and Jesus got to do with collective bargaining? Well, Jesus did a bit of collective bargaining, like with the leaves and fishes, the loaves and fishes. I'm not saying he was the first trade unionist, but with his loaves and fishes, there was a little bit of collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is a process of negotiations between an employer and employees. The idea is to regulate salaries, working conditions, benefits, and other rights. And of course, as we know, and many of you probably are, members of trade unions, depending on what you work at, many who might be members of an employee association. But generally that's done between trade unions and employers. But in some cases, it's done between trade union secretariats and governments, like the TUC and the Westminster Government, and the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and the Dublin Government and the Northern Ireland Assembly. But I'm just thinking here, which one of those guys owns Amazon? I think it's Jeff, is it? Jeff owns Amazon. And Jeff is worth $199.2 billion US dollars. And I wish him well. I hope someday he can round that off to 200. It would look neater and tidier. But do you know, Jeff does not allow his workers to organize in order to enhance their earnings in Amazon. Amazon has fought the rights of its workers to be represented by a trade union. Oh, he'll show he's liberal and fly all the woke banners over his Amazon. Look at me, I'm pro this, I'm pro that. But he won't allow his workers organize to enhance their pay, their conditions, and so on. And I know this. I know this from Friday, when I was in Galway, but Isabella and myself were in with the Teamsters in Washington a few years ago. And Andy Banks, who is the chief organizer for the Teamsters, told us that they were running a major campaign to help the workers in Amazon to join the trade union. And what does Jeff, I'm not saying Jeff personally does this, but his managers, as soon as somebody is organizing the union, that person is sacked out of the company. And the reason Jeff gives, he hasn't told me this person, but I read that, is that he prefers to have direct relationships with workers, as he believes unions slow down business initiatives that are beneficial for employees. Some people might agree with that, and there is a possibility of that. Now, I'm not completely familiar with that business model, because when I was a trade unionist, we worked hand in hand with the companies to try and enhance their wealth. Because just like our friend who wanted to build the new barns, the companies I worked with wanted to build new post office and telecommunication centres and so on and so on. Because I knew if they became wealthier, my members would get more pay. I don't know why Jeff doesn't know that. He probably doesn't need to know, because he just sacks you when you're burnt out. And as I mentioned earlier on, I spent Thursday at the Communication Workers Union annual conference in Salt Hill, Galway, so you shouldn't be too surprised I'm talking like this. I was a guest of my good friend, Sean MacDonald. I remember Sean when he came in as a postman in Galway City and then got involved with the union. And I went down to meet him in Galway to encourage him to stay active in the union. And now he is General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union. And one of the most decent men you will ever meet. And one of the most honest men you will ever meet. And a man who really believes in serving his brothers and sisters. And Sean informed the conference of the opposition of companies, even where their staff want to be a member of the union. Such in the west of Ireland, there's a small call centre there, owned by BT, that recognises unions here, and in GB. But BT will not allow a union into that company in the west of Ireland. I'm not making a big ideological point here. I'm actually following the thinking that I've processed from the Bible, where God tells this man, you're foolish to hoard all this wealth that you could live for 20 lives when your soul is going to depart tonight. So tough, said God. Now, I don't know if God will actually say it to you, but I can hear him kind of saying to him. And here is a situation where ordinary working people, because remember, that's most of us. I know very few people who are super wealthy. And I know most people I know have worked in some form of employment and have needed a level of protection in that time. So there is a big moral dilemma there. And I think we're learning from Scripture about that moral dilemma. O'Reilly, who was there from the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, joined Sean in stating the need for ordinary, decent people in their workplace to be allowed to organise and to be represented by their chosen organisation. It's a moral argument. By the way, I point out, employers have associations, and they're all recognised by everybody. And they even receive grants from governments to enhance their training and so on. So it just seems to me, and if I ever bump into Jeff, or maybe if any of you know Jeff, you might just take it up with him. Jeff, you nearly have, and Chris Hudson hopes someday you will have a rounded off $200 billion US. But would you not think that ordinary folk should be allowed in your place to have somebody to speak on their behalf? It's the right thing to do. Well, I know faith and religion, and that's why we're here. Faith and religion is first and foremost about personal salvation. We gather in churches because we have a sense of faith, a commitment to God, an understanding of our religion. And it's about maybe our own salvation in this world or in the next world that we are enhancing ourselves towards. But there's a part of me that still clings curmudgeonly to the social gospel that says there's also the other issue about a sense of value and a sense of worth of each and every one of us, whether we're at play, whether we're at prayer, whether we're at worship, or whether we are